welcome to the Kansas Legislature right here at Smoky Hills Public Television in Bunker Hill. I'm your host, Becky Kaiser. I'm an employee of Eagle Communications in Hayes with Hayes Radio and also with Hayes Post News, and we are delighted to have you with us this evening. You're part of the show, and we have a toll-free number for you to call if you have a comment or a question of our legislators this evening. That toll-free number is 1-800-337-4788. Also, I am a fellow of the Doctoring Institute at Fort Hays State University and appreciate their help with tonight's show. I want to introduce our legislators, then we'll find a little bit out about what they're doing as the session is getting close to winding down. To my very far left is actually, we have we were just talking about this before we went on the air, which is unusual, and we're delighted to have two Democrats from the eastern side of Kansas with us this evening. Furthest away from me to my left is Representative Rui Xu, who is from District 25 in Westwood, and then closest to me is Representative Christina Haswood, who is from Lawrence, and she is a Democrat from District 10. And Representative Xu, let's just start with you, and if you would remind people, it's been about a year since we've seen you, so welcome back. Good to see both of you. But let's have you talk a little bit about what committees you're on and what things that you're working on as the deadline and clock starts ticking down.
Thanks. It's great to be back. I was here last year. It's always nice to make the 3-hour drive down here. So I serve as the ranking Democrat on financial institutions and pensions. And so this year we've worked on a variety of issues. The biggest thing that's most important to me, and it's not really directly related to financial institutions, but is really relevant to rural Kansas and the state as a whole, is housing. I was able to work with the chair, and he gave me a whole hearing, which again is rare for Democrats, a whole hearing just on housing and how we can both look at policies and funding to try to create more housing supply options both in rural Kansas and urban Kansas. On the Commerce Committee, we've been really busy on a variety of fairly controversial issues. We've talked about foreign land ownership, which I know is an issue here in our rural areas. We've also looked at kind of changing around child care regulations a little bit as well. My last committee is agriculture in the afternoon. Not many agriculture interests in my part of the state, in my district, but I'm really fascinated to learn everything that happened and the issues impacting agricultural Kansas. In Johnson County, we are obviously downstream in the food system, and so I always have to remind people of home, it might not impact you directly what's going on in the agricultural industry, but downstream we need to be aware of what's going on.
Absolutely. Thank you very much. Representative Haswood, tell us a little bit about your committee work and what you're looking at as the clock ticks down.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me here today. I'm so excited to be here. I think this is my third time, so it's always a treat to come out here. I sit on the committees of Federal and State Affairs, Health and Human Services, Taxation, and I'm the ranking on the Joint Committee of State and Tribal Relations. And most of our committees have wrapped up this week. So next week, starting Monday, we're going to be on the floor all day, starting at, I think, 8:30 a.m. So it's going to be an early start for a lot of us in the House. But basically, at this point, we are looking at what bills are going to be coming up for discussion. There's literally a document called General Orders, and right in the middle of it's called The Line. It's literally called The Line. And we get those about every day, around 3:30 or so on. And that will tell us the bills that we are planning on debating. And at this point, what we can do is create amendments and try to make the bill better in our opinions for our districts. So that's currently what I'm planning on today, and just trying to brush up as much as we can. I think there's about 24 bills above the line on Monday. So I don't know how many are going to be the next day and the next day. So it's going to be a week where constituents out there can contact your legislator. And if you hear an issue or a bill, email, give us a ring on our office phones and let us know what issues that you care about the most, and particularly maybe if a bill is good or if a bill is bad. So that's really a helpful time at this busy time in the legislature.
And you really do look for that input.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Definitely, when we get into the end of session and things are coming into a conference committee and, we have big taxes and the budget, and we hear people say this is a compromise. Is it a compromise to our communities, or is it a compromise that our community stakeholders feel like it truly is a part of our values with this legislation? We get bills where maybe there's 5 good things and then maybe 2 bad things. What do we do then? So that's that is one of the times where I like to call home. I like to get, my constituents' opinions and say, what do we think?
Do both of you travel quite a bit well, obviously you're here on a Friday night, clear on the other side of the state, and we appreciate that. But I was talking to some young people in high school, and I don't think they realize that there's more to it than just being present on the floor, that you and your colleagues do a lot of visiting with your constituents, and a lot of traveling is involved with that.
Yeah, maybe not as much travel as some of the legislators on the western side. They have to drive really far to get from community to community, whereas we're pretty centralized. Our districts are pretty small. But, even just coming out here, so I drove 3.5 hours out here. Sometimes I stay the night, but tonight I'm driving back immediately after because I have a 9 a.m. forum in the morning back in the home district. And so during session, there's a lot of that. Out of session, there's a lot of constituent meetings as well. There's a lot of conferences that happen, and so those are good opportunities to meet with legislators from other states, maybe other states similar to Kansas, and just kind of share ideas. That's where I got a lot of my housing ideas, actually.
Well, lots of things to talk about, but first of all, probably what most people have heard about within the last couple of days. Finally, there were some hearings on whether or not Medicaid should be expanded, and as I understand it, didn't really go anywhere. So what are the options now at this point, Christina?
Yeah, so the other day, I guess that was yesterday.
Time moves differently.
It does, doesn't it? That we try to pass it out of committee with no recommendation, which is definitely a unique procedural move. And we had a lively debate in Health Committee on why we support this. I had a couple of my colleagues get over 450 of the testimony that Kansans sent in to ask us to pass Medicaid. They got the stack and boom, put it on front of the desk to visually show that there's an overwhelming support of Kansans who support Medicaid expansion. At this point, it did not have the votes to move out of the committee. So for now, there is not the normal procedure of this to become a bill. I'm not exactly too sure on the Senate side what has happened with Medicaid expansion, but on the House side, I feel like our options right now are, maybe try and find a bill that could be germane to try and add in as an amendment, which unfortunately I don't really like. But all of us Democrats on the Health and Human Services Committee call to action to put this on the House floor for a vote. And I specifically told in committee that, there's 17 of us on this committee. This is such a huge issue to our state. It should not be up to just the 17 of us. We should allow all 125 of our House colleagues to make that vote to show the Kansans and their constituents where they really stand on those values.
When you get that much input for people asking for the expansion, that's exactly what you're wanting in the first place, is how do you feel about it? And then what do you say when it looks like the majority of Kansans are interested in it, want it to happen? Certainly we know our governor is, and yet we don't seem to be able to get it to go anywhere.
Sometimes, and this is sometimes the hardest part about the job, is just saying logic and reason and good ideas don't always win out in Topeka, unfortunately. There are a wide variety of larger political forces at play. There are lobbyists at play. And sometimes good ideas, such as Medicaid expansion, just don't win out. And so I was in the House in 2019, which is the last time that we were able to get a vote in the House. And that was one of the better days in my time in the legislature, was being able to talk about it. My mother-in-law actually fell into the Medicaid gap in Missouri when I was younger, and unfortunately we were not able to get her care because Medicaid had not been expanded yet. And so it's really personal for me that we're able to get care for these people that fall into that Medicaid gap.
And Kansas is one of just 10 states that have not passed it. Do you either one of you have an understanding what the opposition is to this?
So we've heard rhetoric of able-bodied So in the HB 2556, if I remember correctly, the bill number, it does add a work requirement to show that proof of you are looking for a job type of thing. So it was actually a compromised bill. Someone like myself who might not love that, this is understandably what the opposition has been saying. Opponents still would not budge. And it was upsetting because Medicaid expansion helps elderly, disabled, and pregnant people. And some of the folks who did testify in opposition have goals to improve mothers and babies. And with Medicaid expansion, not only, I believe the chairwoman said this, if a pregnant person is on Medicaid, they're on there before the baby's born. In Kansas, you have 12 months postpartum to still be on that Medicaid. And then after that, it depends on your job situation. So Medicaid expansion really helps those folks. And I feel like the people we're talking about are hardworking Kansans who are making, maybe 10 hours or so per hour on a wagely job, just trying to get by. And it also helps folks with medication, so it helps them stay and work and to be healthy, to not only provide for themselves, but their families and their children. So that was just something I couldn't quite wrap my head around when we saw opposition from folks who have those family values.
Well, we have our first phone caller of the evening. We have Rhonda from Wichita on the phone. Rhonda, your question or comment of our legislators?
Hi, thank you for taking my call. This is a bit off the topic, but I saw this just recently where a former corrections officer at the Larned facility, even though he'd been involved in something that we all abhor, drug running, marijuana, tobacco, methamphetamine, and he's receiving probation. That kind of rubs against all of us who expect our laws to be enforced. But I also wonder what happens to a government pension if someone in law enforcement is found to have been, let's just say, very grossly negligent in the commitment of their duties.
That's a good question. Quite honestly, I've not heard of this issue. I'll look into it and then see if I can't get an answer. If you want to reach out to me after the fact, that is troubling and concerning, and obviously we want to put as much trust as we can into our corrections officers, and then so whatever we can do to reinstill public trust, we're open to it.
Go back to something that you said a little bit earlier, Representative Xu, talking about your committee work, and U.S. Congressman or Senator Jerry Moran testified earlier this week talking about the Farm Bill, and people around here, definitely in the western part of Kansas anyway, are definitely paying attention to that, as we all should, and it has been stalled for quite a while, and I would be curious what your thoughts are on what that does to the state of Kansas, and if the state legislature has any options in being able to bring that along.
Not that I'm aware of. I think that the legislature has its lane of the state stuff, and the federal government has its own lane. I would say that much of the things that are in the Farm Bill, like SNAP, is part of that. That has been under a continuous attack in the State House this year. And so I think that we can soften the rhetoric on things like that a little bit. Ultimately, I think this comes down to political dysfunction, and the federal government is just really, really not functioning as the people are demanding. And I think it's time to start looking at some different options to see what we can do, because right now the House is obviously always in turmoil on who the next speaker is going to be. I think there was another motion made today to get a new speaker. The Senate with the filibuster is always at risk of not being able to pass anything at all, and so it's just not functioning to actually govern.
That makes me think we might also take this opportunity to explain the difference between our federal officials and our state officials. The Kansas does not have the option not to come up with a budget, correct?
Correct. We have to pass a budget, and it has to be balanced. That is the one thing that we have to do every single year.
So why can't the feds do it?
I don't know. That is above my pay grade, and I am certainly glad that I'm not in D.C. every single day.
It's tough. It's tough. We're staying on the line with the Farm Bill and related. Do you have any update? Have you heard anything more about? There was some activity regarding the what do I want to call it? Hemp, industrial hemp, which is something that people got pretty excited about out here in western Kansas and growing it. But I understand there were some barriers that have been discussed and lessened a little bit. Do we have any finality with that?
We passed it out of House Agriculture Committee at least to really soften the regulations and certainly soften the licensing fees for industrial hemp. I believe we passed it out of the full House as well. I don't know what happened to it over in the Senate, but I totally agree. On the front end, when we first passed industrial hemp, it was pretty popular as people were trying to learn, but that has really gone downhill since in the last couple years or so. And so whatever we can do to kind of lower the barriers of entry to get more people interested in industrial hemp and experimenting, we're open to trying.
Would there be any of that in eastern Kansas or no? You talked about the difference when there's more crop growth out here in
I haven't
Kansas.
heard of much. The biggest processor and the biggest grower that I've heard of is in Great Bend. They come up to Topeka quite a bit and testify, but I haven't heard of anything much more east than that.
We also had some attention drawn to the Ogallala Aquifer, which of course is in western Kansas and a huge resource of water and something that has become somewhat of a battleground because we know that it's decreasing, although I understand just from recent reports it's fortunately back up a little bit, but we can't depend on that. Where do we stand on, especially the state as a whole? We talk about it in western Kansas and how important it is to our crops, but in eastern Kansas, of course, we're also talking
very important issue, but like everything, I feel like in politics, we all have different solutions to get there, and making sure that we fully fund the water portion of our budget as well. I know historically it was underfunded, so trying to get caught up on a lot of those programs, and working with folks like groundwater managements, rural water districts, and making sure that there's that representation as well. When I was actually on the agriculture committee my first 2 years with Representative Xu, and I got the privilege to come out west and look at different water treatments and seeing how even plumbing can be different with septic tanks, and then how does that differ from the eastern side as well. So I feel like the consensus is this is definitely an issue. And I know our water leadership, Representative Minix and Representative Vaughn, have been doing a tireless job of traveling all across our state to try and work together with that as well. And on the Joint Committee of State and Tribal Relations this year, we had an opportunity to hear from tribal leaders on water issues, which they are feeling a lot of that consequences of the herbicides and pesticides coming downstream into their agriculture spaces. So it's really interesting to hear that conversation as well into the water conversation.
Like any large-scale project, though, with water, it's going to cost money. And I think one of the biggest problems is that we've not now. It's still just an appropriation, which is year to year.
We'll see what happens. We have another phone caller this evening, Ken from Winona. And Ken, your question or comment this evening?
Yes, thank you. My question is, could you explain the flat tax and its impact, and also discuss tax policy for us this evening? Thank you.
popular topic. Where the governor came out with her proposal early in the session, I think unexpectedly early, and we've had some changes. And I just saw that the House did come up with something not like it did in its original proposal, but maybe that's something that will be amenable to everybody. Where do we stand at this point, Christina?
Yeah, so the flat tax, I believe, had a 5.25% when we first saw it earlier in the session. And what gave me a lot of hesitancy is when you broke it down by income and seeing how many folks would have that type of savings. Once you get higher in income, there was more of that savings. And I live in a district that's very working class, college students, which is different than some of my colleagues on the Johnson County side. And so I come into this conversation with that. What's going to work best for folks who make, less than $70,000 or less than $100,000? And the savings weren't there. And tax committee most recently this week, we saw a more compromised tax budget, but it did not include hygiene products. And I believe the child tax credit might not be in there as well. But and then there was several amendments that were ran. We actually, this was yesterday again. There was really great amendments. But unfortunately, there was an amendment to, cut the food sales tax starting July 1st, 2024, instead of January 1st, 2025. And these are all really great ideas, but, the chairman does an excellent job. But we have to, stay on budget and make sure that we're not trying to add too much to the fiscal note of it when we have all these different tax bills and amendments coming through, which is very frustrating for me, I feel like.
And just to talk a little bit more about kind of broad tax ideas. So right now we have a 3-tier income tax bracket. And the highest tax bracket kind of starts if 2 people make $60,000 or more. A flat tax sounds fair. That makes it so there's only one income tax bracket. But the problem is that for me, money and income has diminishing marginal utility. So the more of it that you have, the less that each additional dollar is actually valuable to you, right? The first $100 that you earn, you're going to spend it on food, housing. The $1,000 that you own probably is still going towards that thing. If you make $1 million, that money is probably just sitting in savings. And so that's why a little bit of a progressivity in your income tax code is actually a good thing and a beneficial thing. It's able to provide that. To Christina's point, I do represent a pretty high income district. I represent Mission Hills in Johnson County. And at all of my forums, I have not had a single person honestly say that they support having a flat tax. These are the people that would benefit the most from a flat tax, and they say, no, we're fine with the current tax rates. I want you to expand Medicaid. I want you to keep funding our public education and even look at some maybe service enhancements like free schools, free breakfasts for people.
Interesting.
Yeah.
One of the things I wanted to ask about regarding that, and somewhat related, and I'm not sure that this is still in the budget or not, but there has also been discussion about what the state can do about property taxes, which is, and I understand everywhere you go, people are complaining about that. Nobody wants to pay those taxes. There's not a whole lot the state can do about that, but there's a little bit. Christina, where do we stand with that and being able to reduce or ease the pain a little bit?
If I recall correctly, the tax bill that we passed out on the House Tax Committee, one of the main concerns that we saw in that proposal, and there's, I'm waiting for the summary so I can see bullet by bullet point what's in it and what's not in it. As someone who's, in my second year, I'm always learning every day. I call the tax committee my learning committee. But we saw concerns of opposition from our schools and public schools that it reduced the mill levy, I believe, by 2 mills. And that is a concern of funding our public schools. There's nothing, according to their testimony, there's not a solid plan to how you're going to backfill those mill levies when they decrease. And, other proposals like funding the LAVTRF. In that tax plan, it was to not support it. And so when we don't give that money back, to our local counties, that's not a solution, I believe, that's currently on the table.
There's a lot of ideas out there, and I think funding the LAVTRF is a good one that we've used in the past. It hasn't been funded in a long time, but we've used it in the past. It gives money back to the cities and counties to be able to reduce their property tax burden. But for me, the issue is actually why property taxes keep increasing. The reason property tax keeps increasing is because property values keep increasing, which is a good thing for the most part, but property values keep increasing because there's a mismatch between supply and demand. Right now, in both rural and urban Kansas, property demand far exceeds the supply, which is why I focus so much on housing this year. We need to be able to build a lot more housing in urban areas. In Johnson County especially, we're seeing so many people move from rural parts of the state to here because hospitals are here, services are in Johnson County. In rural areas, it's kind of a different reason. People aren't building new houses there because they're not getting their value back. Developers are just not being able to build a house and get that value back. So we need to find ways to incentivize developers to build new housing. And then once you start building that housing, it's kind of field of dreams-ish, but I think people will start coming back. Because right now I have a friend in the district. He's originally from rural Kansas. He has 3 kids. And he said right now, if he wanted to try to move home, there's really no housing stock available for him that would be a reasonable fit for his family. And so we need to be able to figure out that problem.
And you say available, literally available, or is cost an issue?
Cost is not necessarily really an issue in the rural areas. If you're moving from Johnson County to rural areas, the housing costs will be much cheaper. But right now, the houses are either too old and don't kind of fit a modern lifestyle, or again, they're just not available. As people are starting to leave rural areas, the houses that were once good kind of get dilapidated, and then you can't really do much with them. And so we've looked at ideas like being able to rehab some of these older houses and provide incentives there. But yeah, really the issue is just that there is no available housing stock in much of rural Kansas.
I didn't realize that spread across into eastern Kansas, thinking about western Kansas, and you have so many small communities, and they are older population usually, and older homes, but I didn't realize that's truly a problem across the entire state.
It's for different reasons, right? And in Johnson County, we have plenty of developers, but we do have a population that I would say is averse to multifamily, averse to really dense housing options, which is what we need in a metro area, right? Johnson County kind of has a reputation of being kind of a suburban haven, if you will. And the problem is that people keep moving here, and then there's nothing we can do to stop or stem that. And the only option, if you do want to keep property taxes low, is to build housing to kind of balance out that supply and demand.
You almost sound like, to me, people keep moving here is not a good thing. Is that what you're saying?
I'm not saying that. I want people to keep moving here.
Okay.
But we have to have the housing for them to
Sure.
do that. So Panasonic, again, is a great thing, and that will bring a lot of employees from around the world to Kansas. But adding 4,000 new employees with not adding, 2,000 new houses is going to lead to property tax increases, right?
In Lawrence, we have to cut schools locally in these more older areas of Lawrence because we don't have the updated regulations for dense housing that we need inside. So unfortunately, developers are looking out in more rural Douglas County to look for those lands to build those more affordable housing. And we have the World Cup too, so we're really feeling in eastern Kansas that pressure to make sure we have everything available for folks to be comfortable during that time.
Talking about things that are happening in Kansas and eastern Kansas particularly, there was a big announcement from Mattel for a fun thing that will happen in
The amusement park, right?
in Bonner Springs.
Yeah.
Is that where it is?
I think so.
And I'm curious, this is an attraction for people to come and visit, and obviously people who live in Kansas too. But what does that do for our economy? Does that bring more people in? And do they get special consideration for building something like that in Kansas?
As far as I'm aware, they have not come to the Kansas Legislature for this specifically. They might fall under an existing star bond district. I'm not sure. But again, the goal is to get people to visit here. But they have to execute it well, right? And people are not going to travel across the state or cross state lines for something that ends up being a disappointing product. And so, again, I just heard about it. They've not had much of a legislative presence or made a presentation about it, but I'm excited about it. My wife and daughter are certainly excited about having a Barbie land a little bit closer.
Oh, it sounds like fun. I thought we might move on to, and this is something that we, back to the difference between the federal representatives that we have and at the state level, but we've been hearing a lot about the social app TikTok, and in fact our Kansas Attorney General has filed suit against the parent company, and there is some concern that it is dangerous to the United States. Has the Kansas Legislature weighed in on that in any way?
I can't remember if it was this year or last year, but there was an executive order from Governor Kelly to not have access to TikTok on government Wi-Fi. And then the legislature came in and basically doubled down. And so you cannot access TikTok on the government's open Wi-Fi. And I have not heard much of, I think I might have saw a bill above the line addressing cybersecurity. So the legislature is looking more into it, but that's all I can recall.
Yeah, and kind of relatedly to this, a lot of this stems from mistrust of the Chinese Communist Party. And so we've had other bills that have gone through the legislature this year that touches on this issue. There's one bill that that requires KPERS, our pension system, to divest from any company in China or some other countries considered countries of concern. It also requires any companies holding lands or preventing them from owning land in the state as well. Those have passed out of committee. I'm guessing we'll see them on the House floor next week.
We'll see what happens. We have another caller on the line. Edie from Bison is with us. Edie, you have a comment or question of our legislators?
Yes. Regarding vouchers, school vouchers, I'm a retired school teacher, and I'm in the middle of Kansas, and I have major questions about all the vouchers that keep coming up. Are voucher ideas, as in no accountability and access. When you are in the middle of Kansas or western Kansas, there are no private schools to go to. And I have the feeling that maybe we are funding people who are already going to private schools. And I have a major issue with state and religious vouchers. Anyway, I'd like to hear what you have to say about it.
That's been a pretty hot topic as well. What's the latest?
Yeah, so I think we're going to see more of education, I believe, this week. But you're right. It's not good for rural Kansans. I have not heard many private schools out this way. And thank you so much for being a teacher. That's such a hard job. I volunteered in classrooms and quickly found out that being a teacher in our K through 12 school systems is one of the hardest jobs ever, I would say. And you're right. If you don't have that school board entity, there's none of that public regulation or that checks and balances. So I feel like a lot of that with charter schools, you hear that board might be, appointed depending on maybe the business plan of the school. And that opens the door, I feel like, to more of that, business interest, in comparison to folks that we elect on our school boards, who follow the same election process, who have a bigger constituency in Lawrence than I do. They run in the entire school district, and my district is just a portion of that. And in my opinion, we should not be using those public funds for private schools. One of my concerns, especially when we haven't fully funded special education, is folks who might need that extra attention, will they get turned away from these schools that might have a standard to get in or eligibility list to get in, and where do they end up going? And then we heard from actually a homeschool group who actually emailed us this session saying that they are not supportive of vouchers. So, this is a issue I feel passionate about, that we should be fully funding our public schools and more. In Lawrence, we've already had several school closings, and trying to figure out, how can we best serve our population, not only for the children, but for the staff, who are doing so much work and having to buy their own school supplies. That should just not happen.
And just as a quick data point as well, Edie, you're totally right. I think about from Arizona, who has in fairly recent history passed a large voucher program, something like 70 to 80% of voucher recipients were already in private school. And so essentially what you're doing is you're taking money away from rural areas and using them to fund people, I mean, quite frankly, in my district, who are already doing pretty well off and their kids are already in private schools. It does not benefit rural areas whatsoever. It really harms our special education students because our public schools have to take everybody who wants to come to their schools. And it just really, really harms the system as a whole.
Wanted to touch on cybersecurity. We know that there was a massive breach with the Kansas Judicial Center back in the fall, October, I think it was, and the state realized we're going to have to do something. And as from what I understand, has been. I know in Ellis County and Hayes, they just did get back to where they were supposed to be. That literally was this week, so I'm sure it's been a painful process for everybody. But where do we stand on beefing up cybersecurity for the state?
Yeah, this is, for me, is one amongst many, but one of the many sad things about the brown bag tax experiment is because our revenues were so low for that amount of time, 8 years, 10 years, the thing that fell off was required maintenance on IT infrastructure. We saw this a lot during the pandemic with the unemployment system. We were just not able to keep up, and so when things went bad, the system was not able to keep up. Same thing with the judicial system. And so, you know, like any deferred maintenance or any maintenance that is required of any sort of infrastructure, yeah, it hurts on the front end to have to pay a little bit. You know, I don't love having to get my car oils changed every couple months or so. It hurts the wallet a little bit, but the cost of not doing it is exponentially more, and I think we're seeing the effects of that.
Are you pleased with the progress of what has been going on?
I think we could do more, and me and Representative Xu are on this thing called Future Caucus, where I believe it's a group of us under the age of 35, no, maybe 45?
40 now, yeah.
40. And we bring this up a lot of technology, of AI, and these issues that we don't see our legislators maybe creating a task force or a committee in itself. And I think this is an issue with no political boundaries of how do we, you know, talk about these issues. What can the state of Kansas do? Where's the state of Kansas at on this? And how can we improve? It's a really issue that we need to, I feel like, focus on more.
Future is here.
It is.
We have another phone caller this evening. Daniel from Elkhart is on the line. Daniel, your question or comment of our legislators?
Yes. I called 4 years back complaining about property tax, that the assessment tax was too high in Kansas. And why does it take 4 years for the legislator to even do anything, you know, try to do anything about it, introduce a flat tax or anything?
Well, on the property tax front, actually very little property tax is actually controlled by the state legislature. There's the 20 mills that is required that the state has to do that funds our schools. I think there's maybe 2 or maybe 5 mills that go towards like the estate building fund. But almost all of the rest of the property taxes are levied at the local level. So those fund schools to some extent, those fund community colleges, things like that at the local level. So the first part of that is that the state doesn't have that many levers available. The second part is that of the levers that are available, the legislature has just not chosen to use those tools. The LAVTRF fund used to be a thing that we used to fund quite frequently. We have not funded it, I believe, in over 20 years.
Do you know why that happened? Why it stopped?
I think it was part of the brown bag. Yeah.
Politics.
Yeah, I assume politics. And so again, I just keep going back to if we're it feels like the kind of short-term solutions keep getting caught up in politics. That's why I've tried to really focus on the long-term reasons why property taxes go up. Again, the line between property taxes and property values is 1-to-1, right? If your property values go up, your property taxes go up. The rates, you know, they change a little bit. Your cities and counties have a little bit of say on it, but the biggest factor is property values. And the biggest reason that property values are going up is because of supply and demand. And so, again, we really have to address the underlying issue And then until we do that, there are some small solutions that we should examine, but they're going to be dwarfed by the kind of larger market forces at play.
And I will add on to, I just remembered another bit of the issue was that when we did give the LAVTRF to local government folks, they might not have used it all or used a portion of it, but that's, I would say if we give back to local government, they're elected just the way that we are. So that's up to the folks if they are okay with that or not. And I'm actually a apartment renter, so I don't know if any young people are out there, but we have felt that burden as well, and our rent increasing every year. And to the point where I remember I signed my lease 4 years ago at $970 for 2 bedrooms in Lawrence, and we're currently already over $1,000 to about $1,000, maybe $100. So just seeing that increase, and we just live right next to the University of Kansas. So seeing that burden at the renter level as well, property taxes and finding a solution. And I know our chairman, Representative Adam Smith, has tried to do the best job that he can to bring these tax plans. And I feel like the compromise, working with both parties, working with all levels of the government and the legislature, takes a lot of time.
If there are any young people watching PBS on a Friday night, I could make a joke, but reach out to me for an internship next year, because we'd love to have you.
Absolutely. It made me think of something else too. Are we still in a labor shortage or supply and demand crisis? Is that part of our problem with housing?
Partially, yes. It's not nearly as bad as it was maybe a year or 2 years ago. Last year's legislature, basically every single committee hearing, we're hearing we can't find people, we can't find people, we can't find people. And then this year, it's softened a little bit, but we still hear quite a bit of it. But kind of the problem now is we have a new company coming in, Panasonic, and that's going to bring 4,000 jobs. But again, if labor is already a little tight, and to find 4,000 new people to work here is a really big challenge. And so the goal is really just to make the state as attractive as we can for people to want to move here, and that kind of naturally solves the problem.
And in health committee too, we hear that issue of labor mainly with our health professionals, our physicians, our nurses, social workers, childcare workers. Though this is, again, an issue that we all recognize as an issue, though our solutions might be different. And the solutions that we see around this, and we see this in teachers too with the teacher shortage, is where they try to take away, there's legislation proposed to take away part of the licensing requirements. So we see this in healthcare, trying to reduce the hours needed to pass or renew your licensing. And what comes to my mind automatically is our adult long-term care facilities. And somebody, I go back to my stakeholders, and they don't see that as the solution of reducing, your hours to get that licensure. This is one of our most vulnerable populations. Maybe we should look into more other solutions instead of trying to basically cut corners for these licensures. There's also, I believe, a social worker licensure compact making sure that veterans, folks who move a lot, those types of licensures can be applicable maybe from another state to Kansas, and making sure that's all in regulations with the Board of Nursing, Board of Healing Arts, and so forth. So it's really interesting to hear those conversations on the health side.
I read that, and I didn't realize that it was this critical, I guess you could say, that Kansas is short about 1,800 teachers, and I did not realize it, and that's statewide. And there's, as you just said, Christina, a move to perhaps change or lessen or the licensure that's required, which on the surface sounds like, hey, that's great, there'd make more people available. But then, as you said, there are concerns about people not being properly trained or being in the right position at the right time.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things that we've been looking at in financial institutions and pensions is that our CAPER system, the most recent version, CAPERS 3, really is not adequate for long-time employees. If you're only planning on being a state employee or teacher for 5 to 10 years, then it makes okay sense. But we really want to incentivize people to stay in the profession a long time. I'm 35, and I have lots of friends who graduated as teachers, and by the time that they hit 30, 32, they're pretty burnt out, and so they find something else. we really want these people, because once you're out, you're probably not coming back to the profession. And so we really want to create a better pension system, I think, that really incentivizes people to stay in the profession. We want to pay teachers adequately. And, you know, if we're able to solve the problem little bit by bit, then it kind of snowballs, right? If we improve the shortage a little bit, the ratios get a little bit more beneficial, and the job's not quite so stressful, and burnout also decreases a little bit.
Makes sense. Let's talk about early childhood education options. The governor, and this again was pretty early in this session, she talked about creating a singular office. And we have about 5 or 6 different areas that all work with children and early childhood education, et cetera. And coming under one umbrella, I've heard people say that's a really good idea, and I've heard other people say, no, that's just more bureaucracy. Mm-hmm. What do you think, Christina?
I think it's a good idea. You know, if you have a system, a government system or a business, and you specifically say we're creating a department for this, I think that really shows the value, and it shows Kansans' values, and shows across the country that this is something that we really want to not only take a baby step, but take a huge leap into, and making sure that we address it. I've heard, you know, when I was on agriculture committee coming out west and visiting farms, that childcare and education, especially on dairy farms where they have housing for their workers and families and planting roots. I think this is an issue that we really need to tackle at the state level, and I'm really excited for this office to come through. We had an early learning childhood caucus that has been meeting in the past several years, and I try to hop on, but I'm always really excited to hear, you know, this is something that we really need to put our foot forward and put our money where our mouth is on this. Not
to throw cold water on that, I think it is a good idea, but the Commerce Committee that I sit on kind of messed with the bill a little bit. So I do think the bill originally was a good idea. It actually did not create any additional programs at all. It just kind of reorganizes government into one office. So everything in KDHE that touches childhood came over, everything in DCNF that touched early childhood came over, and just kind of made it a little bit more efficient. I think that was a really good idea. However, as the legislature tends to do, it also amended in a bunch of childhood deregulations into it as well. So in a home child care, in this bill that just passed out of committee this week, right now the maximum number of kids in a home child care, if there are 2 providers, is 12. This expands it to 17. This expands the number of infants, I believe, that can be in a home child care from 3 to 4. And so that's a non-starter for me. I think we have right now a pretty safe system. I looked at the data. In 2010, we passed Lexi's Law, which was a kind of a response to a lot of deaths that were happening in childcare. In the 3 years before that bill passed, we had 24 deaths in childcare facilities, which is a lot. In the last 3 years, 2021, 22, and 23, we've had 4, which is 4 too many, but the system that we put in place works. You know, kids are safer, and I'm really uncomfortable with really expanding the ratios like we have. And so, while I do think the efficiency idea is a good idea, the fact that it's combined now makes it an easy no for me.
And I'd like to backtrack.
Yeah.
So this is how we work together is, you know, I didn't know that that was a full-on bill and those were put in, and working together with our colleagues to know that, hey, you're on that committee. I remember in health committee, they tried to put in that extending the per ratio in health committee, and that was something I did not support. So it sounds like from Representative Xu, who's on that committee, that does not sound like a great idea. So I will probably be opposing it as well.
All right. We have another caller on the line. We have Bob from Hayes. Bob, your comment or question this evening of our legislators.
Yeah, my wife is getting close to retirement. She's been teaching 35 years. And in those 35 years, the legislature has done nothing. I mean, absolutely nothing to help the teachers and the retirement. I mean, I know you guys talked about there's 1,800 job openings right now, and you guys still refuse to do nothing. I mean, she can't even retire on the annuity. It's an annuity that they have. Somebody with no education can go get a job at the company and have a better retirement than a Kansas teacher. My question is why, and it's not just you guys, It's been this way for years. Why does the legislature refuse to do anything to help the teachers? Thank you.
Comes down to the values of who's in charge. They're able to fund what they think is important. So one thing that I talk a lot about is a cost of living adjustment. It doesn't sound like your wife is quite retired yet, but for people who have been retired a long time, they have not received a cost of a living adjustment to their CAPERS annuity, like you mentioned, in a really, really long time. I think 30 years or something like that. And so just think, if you retired 30 years ago, you know, you were paying in what you got paid 30 years ago, and you're getting paid out that amount as well. Things are more expensive, and inflation is not built into this at all. And so that is step number one. And yeah, step number two is really looking at the levers available within CAPERS and just seeing what we can do to enhance it, to make it more workable for amazing teachers like your wife.
Yeah, I really wish that was the priority of our K through 12 budget committee or education committee, and putting that forward. Folks of you out there probably heard it called COLA, if I'm correct. And it really breaks my heart, because folks who have been dedicating their lives to educating our future, to educate me, I was born and raised in Kansas, and making that salary that you had 30, 40 years ago, that's not how we should be treating our teachers and our public service workers who have served our communities well. So I really wish the legislator had, and the leadership and the leaders had that different priority, so we can really give that relief to our folks and retired folks.
On a side note, back to CAPERS, we have put more money into that than has been for quite some time, correct?
Yes, that doesn't really do anything for the actual recipients of CAPERS, but it does make the system stronger. So we put hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars to kind of pay down the debt, the difference in our unfunded actuarial liability over the last, I would say, 5 years or so. Again, during the Brownback years, we would pretty routinely miss payments to that, which really put the system at risk. But the system is good, system is strong. Now it's a matter of finding, kind of, again, adjusting the levers to make it work for the most number of people.
Something that related to education that I thought we might talk about, and this has been in discussion for a while, is, and I believe, according to this information, on Thursday, the House adopted legislation imposing a fine for public universities and colleges tying student admissions or faculty hiring to an ideological pledge regarding diversity, equity, and inclusion. We're calling it DEI. And it's two sides to that question and to concerns. What can you explain to us, Representative Xu, what that means and why some people are concerned that we should not be paying attention to that's unfair?
Big question. So in my experience in my 6 years in the legislature, it seems like there is often, they kind of just bounce around from 3-letter boogeyman to 3-letter boogeyman. You might remember 4 years ago, it was CRT, critical race theory, right?
Yes. Last
year, it was ESG, environmental, social governance. For the last couple years, it's been DEI. Again, DEI is something that not only do our colleges do and teach to kind of promote, again, inclusivity, which I think everybody agrees is a good thing. Most of our corporations, the biggest corporations, do as well. Most corporations at the very highest level have like heads of DEI divisions now, and really it's just to make sure that we're being cognizant of our own biases, cognizant of other people's cultures and how they're raised. Somebody who's raised Native has a different worldview than somebody who's raised Asian American. I think it's effective leadership at all levels to be aware of that. And so I think there is a tendency for the Republican Party that this is a threat to their own cultural identity. And I would just say that's not the case. I think it benefits everybody to be more aware of each other's cultural backgrounds.
And higher education institutions historically have left out women, have left out people of color. And currently, if you look at a lot of the statistics, minority folks are still trying to catch up to that opportunity of higher education. So having DEI or some type of statement of diversity or like land acknowledgement really teaches that history that we've all might not have been taught in schools. And, you know, the population continues to be more diverse. It's really a disservice, I feel like, that we would say this is a priority in our Kansas State Legislature instead of, you know, really focusing on the issues that we hear when we door knock, the issues that we hear from our constituents. And it was such a slap in the face to our diversity students in higher education that, you know, because you might not be of the majority, that your way of existing and your struggles to be in a higher education institution that might not have, you know, a lot of Native American folks, African American folks, that a lot of these DEI statements created a community and created that sense of belonging where historically it wasn't. I mean, Kansas, Brown versus Board of Education, where, you know, we really wanted to give education to all Kansans, and this was giving those two steps back. I really wish we could focus on the real issues that our Kansans want us to focus on.
We have run out of time this evening. Thank you both so much for joining us. We've been visiting with Representative Christina Haswood from Lawrence and Representative Rui Xu from Westwood, and we appreciate you coming all the way out to Western Kansas and representing the Democratic minority. It's great to hear from both of you. Thank you for joining us this evening on the Kansas Legislature. I'm Becky Kaiser.